He's just some old man with a mutt and a bad attitude. The officer had scoffed, brushing past the trembling service dog and the cracked VA ID like they were nothing more than litter on the sidewalk. And behind the squad car's tinted window, Marcus Hale didn't argue, he never had. 60 years of silence had taught him that dignity didn't beg to be seen. He simply sat in the back seat, wrists zip-tied in front of him, bleeding from one elbow where he hit the curb, eyes locked on the form of Delta, his brindle-coated Belgian Malinois, trembling and muzzled in a patrol officer's arms. But it wasn't until the shadow box above his fireplace was opened, its lock snapped by force, its contents pulled out by someone looking to check for identification, that anyone realized what they had just done. Inside, they didn't find mail or medicine. They found medals no one in that police department had ever seen. Ribbons too old to Google. A service plaque with a name engraved beneath a Pentagon seal. And at the very bottom, a folded letter, dog-eared but crisp, signed in heavy ink by General Averichin himself. The moment that letter left the box, things changed. Fast. But to understand why armored SUVs and National Guard Command rolled up 6 minutes after Marcus was thrown to the pavement like some kind of threat, you have to go back to that morning, to the quiet walk that started everything. If you believe no veteran should ever be treated like a threat for surviving, like and subscribe. Because what happened next proved that dignity can stand tall even when no one else does. That morning, Marcus Hale stepped out of his one-story bungalow on Leland Avenue wearing pressed brown slacks, a deep navy windbreaker zipped halfway up his chest, and a ball cap bearing a faded emblem, the 101st Airborne Division. Ghosted with sun and time. He moved slowly, not because he was weak, but because 40 years of reconstructed vertebrae didn't move like they used to. At his side walked Delta, alert, silent, focused, her blue service vest snug over her chest, her tags freshly cleaned, her leash gently looped through Marcus's gnarled hand. The sun was just climbing above the oaks when he passed the corner gas station. He nodded at a boy on a bike who didn't look up. A woman crossing the street saw Delta and clutched her purse tighter. And the coffee shop's assistant manager, someone who'd once lived next to Marcus's late brother, turned away as if eye contact might cost him something. None of it surprised Marcus. He wasn't looking for company. He walked this same route every Tuesday and Friday, not because he needed milk or bread, but because Delta needed it, and Marcus believed in consistency. But consistency doesn't protect you from fear, and it doesn't protect you from ignorance. At 9:06 a.m., a woman in a white Subaru called 911. She said she saw a tall black man with a military dog and a stick pacing outside a school fence. That stick? A carved ash cane with his service number burned into the handle. And that school? The one Marcus used to inspect for bomb drills back in '83. He didn't hear the sirens at first, but Delta did. Her ears perked, her body shifted left. She planted herself sideways in front of him, a trained maneuver, defensive posture. Marcus paused, confused for a second, just long enough for the first cruiser to block the intersection behind him. The second pinned him from the front, and by the time the third unit rolled up, the lights were reflecting off every shop window in a 5-block radius. "Hands where we can see them," shouted someone over the loudspeaker. Marcus, startled, raised both hands slowly, one still clutching Delta's leash, the other gripping his cane. "Drop the weapon," the voice screamed again. "It's a cane," Marcus called back, but his voice cracked midway, decades of smoke and damage wrapping around the syllables. "Down on the ground. Now." But how do you drop to the ground when you can barely kneel, when one knee's plastic and the other's metal, when your dog is trained to shield you, not abandon you? Delta barked once, sharp, warning, protective. That was enough. The taser hit him high in the chest. The jolt knocked the wind from his lungs. Delta lunged but was tackled midair by a second officer. She yelped, an awful, muffled sound, and disappeared beneath a pile of uniforms. Marcus, gasping, hit the ground hard. A boot pinned his back. His cap rolled into the gutter. For a moment, everything went quiet. Then, in the chaos of protocol and adrenaline, someone picked up his cane and snapped the top off, looking for a blade. They found nothing. Another officer unzipped his windbreaker and pulled his wallet free. The VA ID was cracked, The photo faded, the chip no longer working. Expired, someone said. No state ID, someone else added. Then, one of them muttered, "He's just another unstable vet." Jesus. Marcus didn't move. He didn't speak. But Delta was whining now, somewhere behind the squad car, her leash clipped to the rear bumper like she was a hazard to contain. A supervisor arrived at 9:21 a.m., scanned the scene, nodded as if it made sense, and gave the order to check his residence for potential indicators of mental instability. The patrol officer, Yum, smug, drove the cruiser back to Leland Avenue, entered with a crowbar, found the lockbox mounted on the mantel, and cracked it open like it belonged to him. What he found wasn't a threat. It was a history no one was prepared for. And that's when things started changing. Because 6 minutes later, 2 unmarked SUVs tore into the station's lot. And before the shift captain could even stand from his desk, General Avery Chin was already walking through the door, sleeves rolled up, voice cold, eyes locked onto the names on the incident report. But that comes later. First, there was a walk, then a dog, then a city's greatest mistake, and a man who never asked to be remembered, just not to be erased. There's a rhythm to silence, and in the back seat of that patrol car, Marcus Hale could hear every beat of it. The hum of the engine, the occasional bark of Delta from the other vehicle, the radio chatter, vague and impersonal, codes, clearances, someone asking if they logged the old guy's stick as evidence. But beneath it all was a deeper quiet, one Marcus knew well. It was the silence before movement, before orders, before everything changed. At 9:29 a.m., 6 minutes after the taser went live, a beige security file was opened on a military base nearly 200 miles away, triggered not by a human call, but by a proximity signal from Delta's embedded service caller, coded for escalation protocol. Her training wasn't just for mobility or PTSD mitigation. She was classified as an active-duty continuity K-9, issued under a specialized command program that no one at the local precinct had ever even heard of. But that didn't matter, because within 90 seconds, that file had auto-pinged 3 names, 2 of whom had been out of uniform for years. The third was still in rotation, currently at a closed-door strategy briefing in Arlington, General Avery Chun. She was reviewing drone corridor maps when her secure device pulsed with a code she hadn't seen in over a decade. Echo 1A. Commander Hale, distress signal confirmed. Her aide didn't ask questions. She just cleared the room. And by the time Chin stepped onto the tarmac, a Black Hawk unit was already airborne. Back in the precinct, Marcus hadn't spoken once. The booking officer, Yum, red-haired, tired, was filling out a report that described the detainee as belligerent and possibly schizophrenic. No one had read his ID carefully. No one thought to call the VA registry. No one noticed the gold thread stitching on the back of Delta's vest. Logistics Command read, lifetime clearance. But Officer Albright noticed something. A hesitation. A weight in Marcus's silence that didn't feel like fear or confusion, but patience. That kind of patience you only learn when you've been taught to wait for chaos to reveal its weakness. He leaned in once and asked, "You got anyone you want us to call?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't have to, because at 9:33 a.m., the first black SUV rolled up to the precinct doors with tinted windows and a single dashboard tag, DOD, Response Priority 1. The second vehicle blocked the back lot. A third, unmarked but followed by a military convoy, slid into a loading dock and killed its lights. 4 men in civilian clothes, all wearing boots far too polished to be local PD, stepped out. At the same time, Delta, still leashed to a pipe in the corner of the Sally port, perked up. Her entire posture changed. Not just alert, ready. And then, the front doors opened, and General Chun walked in. She wasn't in full dress uniform. She didn't need to be. Her presence carved through the station like a scalpel through gauze. The front desk officer stood to say something, but stopped halfway through his sentence when she held up one finger. Calm, direct, wordless authority. She walked past holding cells, past fingerprints, past booking and evidence, until she found Marcus sitting quietly on a metal bench with his wrists still zip-tied and one pant leg torn at the knee. She didn't say Marcus. She didn't say sir. She simply nodded once. And he, after all these years, returned it. The way you nod to a comrade when words aren't necessary anymore. Uncuff him, she said flatly. The officers hesitated. Ma'am, I'm not sure. I am. Her voice didn't raise, but it didn't have to. This man is former U.S. Command Logistics, with field-level clearance on security infrastructures you don't even know exist. He trained half of our deployment leaders. He wrote the manual you failed to read. Officer Albright reached for the zip-tie cutter. Marcus didn't flinch, just held out his wrists like it was all a mild inconvenience. The moment the plastic snapped, Delta let out a soft bark from the back garage. The door opened before anyone touched it. She ran straight to Marcus's feet and sat, never breaking eye contact with anyone in the room. The officers finally started to realize this wasn't over. This was just beginning. General Chin opened a leather folder, slid a single sheet across the booking desk. This is a signed deployment exemption from Homeland Security. You arrested a protected asset. You deployed force on an asset with embedded clearance. And you triggered a national incident response when you ignored the credentials of a federally registered service canine. The sergeant on duty sputtered something about not knowing, but Chin silenced him with a look. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You assumed. You saw an old man with a dog, and you forgot that some of us wore silence like armor. Until you cracked it open. Marcus finally stood, a little stiff, still sore. But every inch of him radiated something the officers weren't trained to handle. Earned authority. Authority that doesn't shout, doesn't threaten, just exists. He reached down, ran a hand behind Delta's ear, then looked around the room. If I had yelled, he said quietly, you would have fought back harder. If I had resisted, you'd have written it off as aggression. So I waited. No one spoke. But here's the part you should remember, he added. Just because someone isn't loud doesn't mean they're alone. General Chun turned to him. Ready to go home, Commander? Yeah, he said. Let's go before someone else tries to educate me about who I am. And with that, Marcus walked out of the station. No press. No apology. No dramatics. Just Delta at his side and a silence so heavy it echoed behind every step. But the weight of what had happened was only beginning to ripple. Because outside, on every street between the precinct and Leland Avenue, people had started filming. And what they caught was the start of something much bigger than any single man. It was the reckoning of an entire system that had forgotten how to recognize quiet strength until it was too late. Marcus Hale didn't demand justice when he walked out of that precinct. He didn't have to. Justice had already slipped its boots on. And as the headlines caught wind, as the surveillance footage made its way into digital hands faster than command could contain it, the public learned what that small-town police station had tried to forget. That silence doesn't mean insignificance, and age doesn't make a threat less real. It makes it measured. The footage went viral first in veteran groups, then to morning talk shows, to policymakers, to the inboxes of military brass who still remembered Commander Hale as the man who once coordinated a 9-country joint evacuation without a single casualty. The nation saw him, wrists zip-tied, knees scraped, service dog yelping, and then saw him again, hours later, walking out flanked by National Guard escorts, his cane in one hand and Delta's leash in the other. They called it the 6-minute shift. But for Marcus, it was just another day someone underestimated quiet leadership. That following Monday, the mayor of Leland called a private meeting with Marcus. So did the governor's office. So did the new director of Veteran Affairs. But Marcus only agreed to meet with one person. Captain Salazar, the precinct's new commander, appointed overnight after the former brass were relieved pending disciplinary review. Salazar walked into Marcus's bungalow with no press, no cameras, just a notebook and a pause before she spoke. I wasn't there that day, she said. but I've read every page, and I want to know what we missed." Marcus didn't get up. He didn't even offer coffee. He just pointed to a wall in his living room, where dozens of clipped newspaper articles, old photos, and service commendations were mounted under a glass case. Dusty, ignored for years, untouched until the incident forced them to breathe again. "That's what you missed," he said. This." He tapped the leg brace peeking from beneath his slacks. "Doesn't erase that." He turned back to the window. "You all kept asking why I didn't say who I was. But no one ever asked why I had to." Salazar nodded, not offended, just listening. The next month, the precinct issued the first silent conduct protocol in the state, a new policy requiring all personnel to undergo immersive veteran identification training, including de-escalation methods with mobility-impaired individuals and automatic verification for violent service animals. They named it the Hail Class. Marcus didn't attend the press conference. Instead, he spent that afternoon walking Delta past the same intersection where he was tackled. No sirens this time. No cameras. Just the quiet rhythm of paws on sidewalk and the soft creak of his cane pressing into the pavement. A few shopkeepers peeked out as he passed. Some waved. Others nodded. One even whispered "Commander" under their breath, like it was a title too heavy to say aloud. But Marcus didn't stop. He wasn't walking for them. He was walking because Delta needed movement, and he needed the stillness that only came after impact. At home, he finally opened that shadow box again, not to revisit the past, but to repurpose it. He pulled the general's letter, unfolded it carefully, and placed it in a new frame, right beside Delta's original service certification and a new letter from the National Guard, an official apology, and a lifetime recognition of status. Below it, he taped a sticky note. "Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's surveillance." A week later, an invitation arrived from the Joint Task Force Memorial Institute. They wanted to feature Marcus in their leadership hall, an exhibit on modern tactical innovation, resilience, and invisible command. He declined. Instead, he mailed them Delta's puppy training vest, worn but intact. No signature, no return address, just a note inside. "Give this to the next quiet one they try to overlook." And they did. They mounted it under glass with a plaque that simply read, "The one they tossed. The one they now salute." Years passed. Leland changed. So did its officers. New recruits were told about the 6-minute shift during onboarding. Every classroom had a copy of the Hail Clause posted next to the U.S. Constitution. And once a year, on the anniversary of the arrest, a silent walk was held, not with speeches or sirens, but with canes, vests, boots, and silence. Marcus never attended. He didn't need to, because he'd already said everything by not shouting when it would have been easy to, by holding the line in stillness, and by teaching, in a single terrible moment, what most people spend their whole lives trying to learn: that real command isn't loud. It's felt. On the morning Marcus Hale passed, peacefully, seated on the porch with Delta's head resting on his foot, the town bell rang 4 times. One for each war he'd helped keep quiet. One for each day the world had tried to forget him. And when they lowered the flag over the precinct, no one had to ask why. They all knew. Because some men don't need medals on their chest to be remembered. They just need one moment, where silence finally speaks loud enough to change the country that once failed to listen.